Coming up on Arirang News, foreign ministers come together from all across Asia in Bangkok for talks on regional security. South Korea will be looking to bring up the retaliatory trade measures imposed on it by Japan and win support from the members of ASEAN. The uncertainty facing South Korea's economy pushes business sentiment even lower. Japan's export curbs not yet factored in, so the months to come could see sentiment slide farther. And Korea's biggest airline suspends a flight to Japan to keep from sending over empty planes as the boycott of travel to Japan grows. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Foreign ministers from around the world will be gathering in Thailand later this week for the 26th ASEAN Regional Forum and other meetings. Our foreign affairs correspondent Lee Ji-won shares with us what to watch at this year's event, which could include trade between Korea and Japan.
Foreign ministers and top diplomats from the 10 ASEAN member states and its 10 dialogue partners, including South Korea, the European Union, and the United States, will be gathering in Thailand this week to discuss politics and security in the region through various multinational ministerial meetings, including the ASEAN Regional Forum. Though not directly a security issue, Tokyo's trade restrictions on Seoul have severely damaged ties between the two countries, and many are watching whether the ministers of both sides will meet on the sidelines of the meetings. Both ministers will be landing in Thailand at around Wednesday noon to get started with their bilateral sit-downs. An official at South Korea's Foreign Affairs Ministry said that it's unclear whether a meeting between Minister Kang Kyung-hwa and her Japanese counterpart Taro Kono will be scheduled, but said the door is still open. He added there are a total of 8 bilateral talks being worked on right now, without specifying the countries. And as part of Seoul's continued efforts to share the unfairness of Japan's export control measures with the international community, Minister Kang is also to relay Seoul's stance at the multinational meetings. She will be attending 5 official meetings, including the ASEAN plus 3 foreign ministers meeting. The official says Seoul's aim is to have its concerns for free trade included in the chair's statements or the outcomes of the talks. But it's not likely to be an easy fight, as the official expects Japan to be pushing its stance as well. While the U.S. has not yet taken a clear stance on this issue, whether or not a trilateral meeting between Kang, Kono, and Secretary of State Pompeo will be held is also a watch point. Another point to watch out for is who will be participating from the North Korean side and whether there will be any encounter between Pyongyang and Washington. Expectations were high over a possible foreign ministers meeting, especially as Ri Yong-ho and Pompeo are heading their respective negotiating teams. But it's been confirmed that the North's top diplomat won't be coming, which has only happened 3 times since the North began participating in the ARF in 2000. While other ambassadors came instead in 2001, 2003, and 2009, it's not yet been confirmed who will be coming from the North this time. And it's not clear if the U.S. delegates will be having any contact with the North. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Despite North Korea's recent missile launches, America's top diplomat is optimistic that the U.S. will soon restart working-level talks with the North and that there should be ways to break the current deadlock. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he's hopeful working-level talks with Pyongyang can get underway again very soon. Speaking to the Economic Club of Washington, D.C. on Monday, Pompeo also said there are creative solutions to unlocking the current impasse in nuclear negotiations in exchange for sanctions relief. Calling the situation a Rubik's Cube, Pompeo said it's a difficult challenge not only for Washington, but also for Pyongyang. Touching on the possibility of a third summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, Pompeo admitted there's nothing in the works at the moment, signaling working-level talks are first on the agenda. While the leaders of North Korea and the United States agreed to resume working-level talks when they held a historic meeting at the inter-Korean border a month ago, Pyongyang has since warned the resumption of talks will be contingent on whether Seoul and Washington go ahead with joint military exercises set for next month. Regarding North Korea's recent firing of 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea, Pompeo, at the time, brushed them off as a negotiating tactic and added he anticipates talks will start again. Pompeo is scheduled to travel to Thailand this week to attend regional meetings led by Southeast Asian states. While there was speculation he could meet North Korea's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho in Bangkok, Ri is reportedly passing on the event. Calling it too hypothetical, Pompeo declined to comment on a scenario where the U.S. would lift sanctions on North Korea as long as the regime didn't build more nuclear weapons. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And 5 days after North Korea launched 2 short-range missiles last week, the U.S. has sanctioned a North Korean man based in Vietnam. On Monday, the Treasury Department sanctioned Kim Soo-il for violating UN Security Council resolutions and supporting the North's missile program. It said Kim, as an employee at the North's munitions industry department, traded goods between North Korea and Vietnam to help the regime earn foreign currency. His U.S.-based assets will be blocked if he has any. Instead of taking direct aim at North Korea, the U.S. has been sanctioning other parties helping the regime. The last time the U.S. sanctioned an actual North Korean official was in December. South Korea's National Assembly is holding a Q&A session with the ministers of Foreign Affairs and Unification, with the focus pretty much on Japan's export curbs. Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa called Tokyo's actions unjustifiable, saying that they are retaliatory in nature. And with Japan likely to remove Seoul this week from its whitelist of countries that benefit from minimal trade restrictions, Kang warned that bilateral ties could take a turn for the worse. She said the government continues to demand that Japan lift its restrictions and halt its plans to take Seoul off the list, calling for dialogue to resolve the issue diplomatically. She told lawmakers that the foreign ministry is arranging for talks with her Japanese counterpart during the ASEAN Regional Forum. 2 months have passed since a tourist boat sank in Budapest, Hungary, killing more than 24 of the Koreans on board. One is still unaccounted for, but having officially concluded their search, the South Korean response team have returned home. Our Park Hee-jun has this report.
The South Korean emergency response team has returned home after wrapping up their rescue operations in Hungary, where they were searching for the victims of the tragic boat accident on the Danube. The 12 rescuers of the 2nd Division arrived at Incheon International Airport on Tuesday. They were dispatched to the site on June 24th and conducted a 2-month search for the victims of the tragedy in May that left 25 Koreans dead and 1 missing. The Hungarian team will continue their search for the 1 South Korean still unaccounted for until August 19th. And when that's concluded, the Hungarian police will continue operations around the site at a normal level. Meanwhile, Hungary's top court has made a non-binding ruling that the decisions by lower courts to release on bail the captain of the cruise ship involved in the crash were unlawful, and the courts had no grounds to free him on bail. The captain, identified only as Yuri C., is a Ukrainian captain of Viking Sigyn, which collided with the sightseeing boat carrying the South Koreans. The Courier acknowledged that the prosecutor's arguments on the risks of flight or evidence tampering were justifiable. This could lead to a new motion by prosecutors to detain him. The captain is currently back in police custody on separate suspicions. According to a statement from Budapest police on Monday local time, he's being interrogated over suspicions that he failed to provide assistance after the tragedy. But the police can only hold him for up to 72 hours unless he is charged. The captain was released on June 13th with a bail set at $52,000. He was also banned from leaving the country and required to wear an electronic tracking device and meet with investigators twice a week. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
For the first time since protests broke out in Hong Kong against the controversial extradition bill, the Chinese government has weighed in, urging the city authorities to enforce the law and restore order. Hong Yu has this story.
Monday saw the first major press conference from Beijing on Hong Kong issues since the former British colony was handed over to China in 1997. Beijing condemned the pro-democracy protesters, saying they commit evil and criminal acts during the anti-government protests that have turned violent in the last 3 weeks. Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office spokesman Yang Guang said restoring law and order in Hong Kong is the most pressing priority. And despite the protesters' call for the resignation of Hong Kong's leader and an investigation into the excessive use of police force during demonstrations, Beijing reiterated its support for the police and for Carrie Lam.
The central government firmly supports Chief Executive Carrie Lam leading the Hong Kong administration and carrying out their lawful duties, firmly supports the Hong Kong police strictly enforcing rule of law, firmly supports relevant departments of the Special Administrative Region government and judicial authorities bringing justice to the criminals.
Asked about the possibility of the Chinese People's Liberation Army being called in, Yang did not deny the possibility, referring to a law that allows the Hong Kong government to request assistance to maintain public order from Beijing's military garrison in the city. But now, even Hong Kong's civil servants, known for political neutrality, will participate in the protests starting from Friday. Such unprecedented participation is expected to pile up pressure on Lam to address protesters' demands. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
More warning bells ringing for the Korean economy. According to the Business Sentiment Index, companies were even more pessimistic this month, and the index doesn't yet reflect the concerns brought up by Japan's trade restrictions. Kim Da-mi reports.
South Korean companies' business sentiment for July fell slightly compared to the previous month. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the Business Survey Index for all industries recorded 73, down a single point a month. The figure for July is far below 100, meaning there are many more pessimists than optimists on the local economy. By sector, electronics and communication rose 4 points to 83, thanks to a bump in shipments of expensive smartphones and higher demand for IT parts, mainly due to seasonal reasons. However, the automobile sector plunged 7 points to 68 due to falling exports and fewer working days. The Business Survey Index in the non-manufacturing sector for July was 72, down a couple of points from the previous month. Construction slumped to 64, down 2 points from the previous month, and science and technology plummeted 12 points to 75 because of seasonal reasons. The Bank of Korea said Japan's export restrictions did not directly affect sentiment in July.
If South Korea does get cut off from Japan's whitelist, that will affect local companies' business sentiment in the near future. For the manufacturing sector, for instance, materials will not be available, which means no production, no sales, no profitability. The outlook is not bright in all aspects.
In addition, as the outlook for August also fell by 2 points to 74, experts point to local firms' concerns over falling exports prompted by Tokyo's export curbs. As sentiment is much lower than previous months, experts say the government has to come up with policies to encourage companies to invest and respond more strongly to internal and external risks. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea's electronics industry was ranked third largest in the world last year in terms of production, boosted by strong sales of memory chips. According to a report by the Korea Electronics Association, the Korean electronics industry produced $171.1 billion worth of goods in 2018, making up 8.8% of the global market. Korea trails only China and the United States, which make up 37.2% and 12.6% of the market, respectively. Over the 5 years until 2018, production in electronics rose by 53.3%, thanks to strong performances by chip makers like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. The vast majority of that volume, however, was electronic parts like semiconductors, so there's a concern that in tough times, like with Japan's export restrictions, that over-reliance could become a problem. The trade spat between Seoul and Tokyo is now affecting the aviation industry. It's largely because of the South Koreans boycotting travel to Japan, and so Korea's biggest air carrier has joined others in suspending at least one Japan flight and possibly scaling down some others. Che Shi-young has more.
Korean Air will suspend flights between the southeastern city of Busan and Sapporo from early September, A company spokesperson said Monday that the suspension will take effect on September 3rd. There's no set date for when or whether the route will be restarted. Korean Air is also considering slashing its number of flight routes to Japan or switching to smaller aircraft from mid-August. South Korea's low-cost carriers have already suspended or reduced the number of their flights between South Korean cities and less popular destinations in Japan, such as Narita. But this is the first time the country's flagship carrier has suspended flights to Japan. Last week, local low-cost carrier TUA Air has stopped its flight service between Muan and Oita. Other local budget carrier Air Busan will stop flights between Daegu and Osaka from September, while Eastar Jet is suspending flights between Busan and Osaka around the same time. Industry insiders say that while the carriers were planning to cut down on some flights to Japan anyway because they were not proving profitable, the airlines are also actively taking into account the boycott of Japanese products by South Koreans. 최시영, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the markets on this Tuesday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at QM Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, Wall Street started the week mostly down, investors waiting to see what we get out of the Fed in terms of an interest rate cut. Here in Korea, a strong recovery today after Monday's rout. How's it looking today?
Yes, as you said, today there has been some rebound of the Korean equity market. On Monday, though, as you said, there's been quite a significant panic selling, and the Kosdaq, which is U.S. similar to NASDAQ, has shown close to 4% decline yesterday. Today, somewhat recovery, but it's only about a 1% recovery. Main reason for all this is because of the economic slowdown that's happening in Korea, and export growth rate is continued to be negative, and continuation of the Korea and Japan dispute is putting pressures on the Korean economy. Exclusion from the Japan's whitelist possibility is putting even further stress at the current point in time. However, though, global market seems to be fairly stable, with the Fed FOMC meeting is expected on the 31st of July, which is tomorrow night. And we are expecting a rate cut of 0.25% most likely. But we think that it's not going to be stopped there. Probably over the next 1 year or so, further rate cut of anywhere between 3 to 4 times expected. So therefore, the continuation of liquidity injection to the system for the global economy is most likely. If that's the case, then most of the Asian market, including Korea, will probably show some recovery with the currency appreciating versus dollars. Korean equity market did recover nicely today, whereas Nikkei also shows some recovery. Shanghai is also up. Shenzhen index is actually up more than 1%.
Right. Well, in the meantime, Korea's trade minister coming back from Washington says there's a lot of concern about Japan's trade restrictions in the American semiconductor industry. What do you think this will have, in fact, on the chip industry globally?
Right. If you look at the semiconductor index, DXI, it has shown continued decline up until July, and then in the last 1 month or so, had a very strong rebound. It's all about supply and demand issue. With the Japan not deciding to prohibit the semiconductor materials related to the Korea, there's been continuation of worry about the production. So there's a strong demand by the global economy that the fourth industrial revolutions, as well as the data centers, these are all requiring a massive amount of additional demand, but supply problem could cause disruption. This will cause the DRAM price to rise. So everybody's worried about the supply chain at this point in time. Therefore, we think that U.S. will probably put some pressure to Japanese government in regards to prohibiting the materials to be sent to Korea. If that's the case, then I think overall it's net positive. So far, in terms of the share price movement of the semiconductor business for Korea, it really hadn't been a negative news per se. Most of the other sectors were heavily affected so far. We think that continuation of demand is likely case for the global economy in regards to semiconductor side. which is net positive for Korean economy.
Got it. Well, the U.S. will be putting some pressure on China, presumably. Their officials are meeting in Shanghai today for the first time in almost 3 months. Coming into these talks, where are the two sides, and what do you think they'll take away from this?
Yes. As you said, today's meeting is set to take place in Shanghai starting Tuesday. And Trump has said that he doesn't think personally China would sign a deal if we had a 2% chance of losing the election. That's what he said. Clearly, obviously, there's still a dispute between these two countries. China has restarted buying U.S. agricultural products, according to the Chinese media. And obviously, before this meeting, they're trying to show some good faith in regards to trying to settle this dispute. Clearly, the key factor is about the intellectual property issues and whether they can provide a law prohibiting any type of the technology transfer in a wrong way. So I think that negotiation will continue. In any case, we think that fourth industrial revolution is something that is here to stay, and both sides will be heavily investing in regards to this industry. So therefore, the demand of the both countries will be very strong in regards to this. The domestic economy, they're trying to boost that because trade dispute causes the much lesser trade. In order to sustain the growth rate for both countries, they will try to heavily provide some kind of boosting measures in regards to fiscal and monetary policies. So yes, we're not sure whether any kind of major settlement will happen between these two countries. But one thing for sure is that both countries will be putting additional boosting measures, which will be benefiting the domestic economy in terms of consumption.
It'll be interesting to watch. All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
Now, this is the first face-to-face meeting between the country's top trade ministers there since May. But expectations for notable progress during this Shanghai meeting are low. As White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said last Friday, he doesn't forecast any grand deal at this time. Washington's demanding greater protection of intellectual property rights and a more balanced trade relationship, while Beijing wants the U.S. to remove its extra tariffs on Chinese exports. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He are leading the negotiations that are scheduled to run through Wednesday. A new activity for those summer nights will open up in Seoul from August 1st. The city government says Namsan Mountain will offer nighttime hiking every Thursday with a guide to explain the various sights along the way, up to an amazing night view of Seoul from the Namsan Observatory. The program will run during the months of August and September when it's too hot to hike in the daytime. It takes 3 hours and up to 100 people can sign up each week. If you're interested, you can book a spot on the city's reservation website or give them a call. Summer is the time to get outside and enjoy some live music and good food. Luckily, there are plenty of options this year in Korea. Music festivals covering just about every genre, from rock and electronic music to jazz. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
The Incheon Pentapore Rock Festival 2019, one of the biggest rock festivals in South Korea, runs from August 9th until the 11th at the Songdo Moonlight Festival Park in Incheon. The lineup includes famous rock bands like YB, Crying Nut, and solo artists like Jang Bum-jun and Kim Jong-seok. One-day tickets cost around $68 or 80,000 Korean won, and it's about $170 or 200,000 won for the 3-day pass. It's free for children under 13 years of age and those above 65. The Pyeongchang Peace Music Festival 2019 will also be held for the first time next month in the eastern alpine city of Pyeongchang. The Gangwon Rock Festival is another music festival that is making its debut this year, also taking place in August in Inje, Gangwon-do Province. For the Pyeongchang Music Festival, the organizers are offering discounts for people who show receipts on purchases they made in the Pyeongchang area to boost the local economy. The Gangwon Rock Festival offers discounts for locals, teenagers, the elderly, and more. These are just a few of the many upcoming music festivals being held nationwide, including those on Jeju Island and the country's southwestern city of Jeonju. There are also festivals in the southern city of Gwangju's Asian Culture Center and more in the suburbs Incheon and Paju. For more information and updates, the organizers are advising people to check out their websites, which provide more details on the lineups, ticket prices, the venues, and much more. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.